So Claire, you mentioned that one of Jesus's biggest claims was that he rose from the dead. That's insane. If someone came down the street and told me that they had risen from the dead, I would think they're crazy and they need some serious help. So how can we take that claim of Jesus seriously?
Yeah, so, I mentioned that you might be surprised to learn that there's a sort of scholarly consensus, even including agnostic and atheist scholars, that Jesus, at least people really believe that they had experienced healing from him, whatever is the mechanism that explains that. Similarly, with Jesus' resurrection, even among those scholars who are not convinced that Jesus really rose from the dead, there is a widespread agreement about a number of facts about what happened in the aftermath of Jesus' crucifixion. So I think the sort of most succinct way to talk about this is just to sort of list what some of those facts are that enjoy this kind of scholarly consensus. And then I think that then the thing is, how do we explain that data? So Jesus' crucifixion is some scholars have even said the most sure fact of ancient history. It's so well attested. But then there are a number of really significant things that are very strongly attested from multiple different sources concerning what happened afterwards. So the next thing is that there is actually really substantial evidence that Jesus was buried in a tomb in a known location. And actually, the details about the tomb in the Gospels match really well with the archaeology at the site in Jerusalem, probably underneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And also that there are a number of aspects of that burial account that just ring true to how burials would have been done at that time and place. And it's in multiple independent sources. So that's one thing. And then that Jesus' tomb was discovered empty a couple of days later by some of his female followers. Now, one thing that many historians will say, including some non-Christian historians, is that it's not very likely that if the earliest Christians were fabricating a story of Jesus' tomb being discovered empty, it's not very likely that they would have made the primary witnesses be women, because unfortunately, women's testimony in the first century Mediterranean was held in very low regard. That's reflected in their often not being able to testify in court, but also in a more theological setting, the idea that women shouldn't be the first recipients of God's revelation. So with all of that in the background, it seems much more likely, if they were making the tomb story up, that they would have some of the male disciples or Joseph of Arimathea, the guy who buried Jesus, be the discoverers of the empty tomb. As it is, it's Mary Magdalene and some other women. And that point seems to be convincing to a majority of contemporary scholars, which is to say that the majority of contemporary scholars think the tomb really was discovered empty shortly afterwards. And then there's the fact that Jesus' followers, again, whatever explains this, were really sincerely convinced that they had encounters with the risen Jesus. They met him seemingly alive again, including when they were together as a group. So that the 12 disciples, there are multiple independent sources that say that the group of the 12 saw the risen Jesus again when they were together as a group, which sort of starts to cut against the idea that they were hallucinating, because group hallucinations aren't a known phenomenon in psychology. And then there's the fact as well that some of the key leaders, some of those disciples, we know we have good historical sources that indicate they were martyred, they were killed for their faith. Now, I want to be clear, that on its own doesn't prove that Jesus rose from the dead. What it proves is their sincerity. So the idea that the resurrection was a fraud, essentially that the disciples knowingly fabricated it, almost no scholar today thinks that hypothesis has any credibility. So really, the main sort of skeptical hypothesis on the table is some kind of hallucination theory. Now, it seems to me that doesn't really do justice to the data. And there's a number of reasons why it doesn't. I think one, that just the sheer number of people who really sincerely claim to have had these experiences of meeting Jesus again. The fact that they were sometimes in groups when they met him again, but also the fact that they use the term resurrection. The Greek word is anastasis. So resurrection is a very special concept in first century Judaism. It's not what so people did know about the bereaved having visions of the recently departed. That was a known thing. But they didn't normally say that that person, my grandma's been resurrected. They said she's been translated into heaven or something like that. Or even her angel has come to visit me. But not that that person has been resurrected. Resurrection for first century Jews was reserved for the end of history, when all the faithful, the righteous Jews were going to be resurrected from the dead together. So that suggests to me that these appearances of the risen Jesus, what they thought that they were experiencing, were very convincing and were suggested that this was a bodily appearance of Jesus, to convince them that this very special concept of resurrection should be applied to what they experienced.